So we want to welcome you today. I feel like that's awesome. Hey, everybody, it's good to be with you. I hadn't seen that till this morning. I just thought that was really very 70s. Fantastic. I thought those were over, but I guess they're just starting again. I guess that's how that works. Well, listen, I'm glad that you're here today. My name is David Griffin, and I just want to say to each of you online, as well as each of you here at the Sunnyvale campus, it is an honor to be able to share with you today, to be a pastor of this church. I watched the Serve video, Barbara and her team, Kyle Kelly, that whole group. They did such a great job of putting that thing together. And thank you so very much for supporting it financially, praying for it, allowing us to try those new endeavors. I'm just telling you that we as a church are living out what we asked you to do when we were during the pandemic. Kind of as we began to thaw, we thought that the hearts of the American people would be laid bare, and you guys are right there alongside us. And we just want to say thank you so very much for partnering with us, whether it be virtually or whether it be in person. We believe that God is doing a great work through our church. And really, I get a little bit emotional thinking about it because I just see God continuing to expand our territory. And thank you so much for being a part of that. So today we do begin a new series called Soul Music. We're going to be looking at a series of songs. We call them psalms when it comes to the Bible, but that's just the Greek word for song. And these are little ditties that we're able to look into that tell us something about the nature of God and about our interaction with God. And so today we're going to start with Psalm 44, and I think that it would be we'd be best served to start with, maybe a hypothetical question, or maybe a question that you can answer personally, probably not out loud, but here it is. Do you ever feel like life breaks better for everyone else than it does for you? I mean, it's easy to do, isn't it? I mean, if you look at social media and you spend much time at all, it's like everybody has better vacations than you. Everybody has better celebrations than you. Everybody has better family than you, a better body than you. They may have a better life than you. I mean, at least that's the way that it looks. I mean, from the way that it's presented. And sometimes we find ourselves having a little bit of a pity party. You know, my favorite cliche, though, to describe a person who's constantly getting the short end of the stick is snake bit. And I think I'm partial to it because I know how it works out and how it came from the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, he was captured, he was beaten, he was imprisoned. And they decided they would send him to Rome. And while he's on his way to Rome, the ship wrecks. And he basically swims to shore. He's able somehow or another just miraculously to get a fire started. And at this point, he's got to think that my luck has been really bad leading me to this place, but now it's getting better. And he reaches down to put another log on the fire, and a snake comes out of the fire and bites him. At which point he's going to be like, really, God, are you kidding me? Is this what's going to take place? I spent my whole life doing what you want me to do, and now I'm shipwrecked on an island, freezing to death, and you just let me get bit by a snake. Anybody else feel like that? I mean, that when it rains, it seems to pour in your life. I mean, over and over again. Do you even maybe privately find yourself, and you probably wouldn't say this to anybody, but if there is a God, and you probably tend to believe that there is, why isn't he on your side? I mean, what do you do when you feel like that? I mean, do you just suffer in silence? I mean, do you find a trusted friend? Do you pay $140 to a therapist? Or do you just kind of bottle it up and keep a lid on the frustration and bitterness, noticing that the bottle seems like it's soon going to burst? Well, the book of Psalms is kind of filled with these emotionally charged, kind of seemingly private feelings, places where primarily King David opens up his spiritual journal and allows people to hear his most intimate conversations with God. And not just his conversations, but also his accusations. And it's not only that he allows them to read them, he allows them to make songs out of them, which is really cool because we all have been moved in some way or another in our lives by music. It just has kind of a special ability to pull the strings of our heart. Maybe it's the Star Spangled Banner does something very special for you. Or maybe it's a worship song. For me, the pandemic was very hard with my extroverted personality. And so The Blessing was a song that I would return to. Kind of, I'll always associate the song The Blessing with that. And when I'm alone now, I got to be honest, I usually, when I can't think of what to say to God, I sing hymns. And my go-to is How Great Thou Art. That's the one that I tend to go to when I sing these hymns. Or maybe for you, it's another song that's meant something to you. Maybe it's a little ditty from back in your high school days. Maybe it's like the Eagles or Phil Collins or REO Speedwagon. I guess I've just revealed what was on my high school mixtape, back in those days. Everybody had one of those. Kids, if you don't know what one of those is, just ask someone over about 50. You pretty much got to get to 50 to find a mixtape that was recorded off of the radio. So the book of Psalms is filled with these, and we've got these moments where God, in this record called the Psalms, he records his interaction with mankind, and some of it is through song. These are intimate songs. These are honest songs. Some of them, like I said, come straight out of David's diary. What we can't put into words, the Psalms often do. And here's the thing, and this is why I want to encourage you to be a part of this series, whether you're in person or you have to watch it online because you're at another place or even afterwards. I will tell you that at some point as you walk through the Psalms, and we're going to give you a taste of different types over the course of these next 7 weeks, but at some point you're going to go, man, the guy who wrote this gets me. And because it came from the inspiration of God, we hope that you go, God gets me. And that's what we're going to do. And before we do, I want to kind of mention a couple of things. I said that psalm is the Greek word for, a song set to musical accompaniment. Secondly, the New Testament quotes Psalms more than it does any other Old Testament book. And this is kind of interesting because there are 10 to 1 number of references to from the book of Psalms in the New Testament as there is any other Old Testament book. So Isaiah has like 40, Psalms has like over 400. So this was very relevant to the New Testament writers. And then King David wrote most of them, although some of them we don't know exactly who wrote them, but we know that all of them were very intimate and personal. So there's a couple of different ways to break down the book of Psalms or types of Psalms. And I'm going to give you 3 of them today. We're going to talk about Thanksgiving Psalms. And these are moments where you're like, God, thank you for this and thank you for that. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Thank you for my family. Thank you. And we should certainly be that kind of person that is looking for opportunities in our songs and in our prayers to thank God for who he is. David, when he wrote most of these songs, did not actually know about what the cross was. It wasn't in full view at that point. And so David couldn't do what we can do. If you can't find anything else to thank God for, you can thank him for the cross. Every time. You always are able to go there. Those are Thanksgiving Psalms. There's other Psalms or songs of ascent. And these are things that they would sing on their journey up to Jerusalem or to their festivals. Remember, they didn't have formalized education like we do today. And so what they would do is they would memorize these songs so that they would have a common experience and they would have common teaching through these Psalms of ascent. And then finally, the most common kind of psalm is the Psalm of lament. Now, what lament means is you're whining and complaining to God. That's it. Does it surprise anybody that this is the most common kind of song? I mean, if we were able to get into your own personal spiritual life and just kind of pull back the curtain, I suspect that songs of lament might be at the top of the list for the most frequent. And at the forefront of Psalms of lament is Psalm 44. And we don't know a whole lot about it, but we know that it was written during a time of national disaster. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist to recognize they are under severe emotional distress. From their perspective, things weren't going well at all. So if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, I want you to turn them on or turn in them to Psalm 44. I mean, it starts out innocuous enough. Oh God, we have heard with our ears. Our fathers have told us what deeds you performed in the days of old. You, with your own hand, you drove out the nations, but them you planted. You afflicted the peoples, but them, our ancestors, you set free. I mean, David is talking about the way that God delivered the Israelites from Egypt with the 10 plagues and then took them into the promised land. And he said that was so meaningful. Those miracles were so huge that our fathers and our grandfathers and our great-grandparents couldn't help but talk about it. And I'm like, I bet, right? I mean, if you had seen the seas part and you were able to walk across it on dry ground, you'd be like, I'm going to tell my kids about that. I mean, if you were one of the ones who for 40 years in the desert, you woke up every single morning with an empty belly, but you walked outside of your tent and there was sweet manna bread from God, you'd be like, hey, kids, but no, today we're still grounding up the wheat, but there was a time we didn't have to do that. God just provided. You would have shared that story over and over and over again. And if you'd been one of those that marched around the walls of Jericho for 7 straight days, and on the 7th day, you did it 7 times and you blew the horn and the walls fell down for no explainable reason other than the fact that God is on your side. If you saw that, you would share that. And if you were one of the ones who was in the Battle of Gibeon when Joshua asked for the sun to stand still and God made it stand still. You couldn't shut me up about that. My grandparents did that. I'm thinking about, particularly my grandmothers, that what I remember most about them are the stories they told. Anybody else in that situation? My grandmother on my mom's side, the story that I remember the most is her talking about her two children that were born and only lived for a few days and passed away. And that my mom was never intended to be an only child, but then grew up as an only child. With my other grandmother, the story that I remember the most that she told me regularly, and I don't even know if my kids know this story at this point, but my dad's father was older when my dad was born. My grandmother was, I believe, 39, and he was in his 40s, which at that time was pretty late. And he had been struggling with alcohol addiction. And she told him, if you want to be a part of this boy's life, you will put down the bottle for good. And he not only did that and became a pillar in the community, he became a pillar in the church, chairman of the deacons, leaders in almost everything, and began a legacy. So both my parents are only children. Now, my sister and I, we've been prolific. We got 9 between the two of us. Who knows how many branches are going to come out of that tree? But here's what they need to know, is that God had a plan. And that story was told from generation to generation. We're able to pass it on to see how God has been faithful. And in verse 3, he continues. He recognizes, he acknowledges what's going on. He says, for not by their own sword did they win the land, nor did their own arm save them, but your right hand and your arm and your light of the face, you delighted in them. In other words, he's saying, we get it. There wasn't anything special about them, nothing substantially different about them compared to us. They weren't more courageous or more faithful or better trained for battle. You just did amazing, miraculous things because you delighted in them, because your face shone upon them. You had them on your team. And we don't deny the importance of that. David's doing okay, right? The psalmist is doing well up to here. And he says in verse 4, you're my king, O God, ordained salvation for Jacob. Through you, we, our ancestors, we push down our foes. Through you, we tread down those who rise up against us. Our hope is in you. Not in my bow do I trust. Not can my sword save me, but you have saved us from our foes and have put to shame those who hate us. In God, we have boasted continually, and we will give thanks to your name forever. Selah, which means a break. This is like the first stanza of the worship song. And he's reflecting on the fact that as a people, he's like, man, we believe in you, God, just like our ancestors did. Our faith is in you. We chose to follow you. We chose to obey you, to embrace you. We are not putting a confidence in ourselves. It's about our ability. It's not about our ability. It's about yours. We have remained faithful to you. And then he's going to crank it up right here. But, verse 9, but you have rejected us and you have disgraced us and you have not gone out with our armies as you promised you would. We're like, snap, he just said it, didn't he? I think we've all felt it before, but this guy just goes right on out and says it. We've been faithful to you, God, but you have rejected us. What do you have against us? Whereas you brought our ancestors success in battles, you've left us stranded. You ever felt like that? You ever had one of those moments where you drop that kind of accusation on God, and when you realize that God isn't going to repent, you figure you better? You may not have said it, but I bet that you felt it at some point or another. I bet that you have. Life's kicked you in the teeth, and you want to let it out with this raw emotion, but he's God. But not this guy. He's going to let it fly, and he's just getting warmed up in verse 9. Verse 10, listen, you have made us turn back from the foe. You made us look like cowards. And those who hate us, they've gotten our spoil. They've taken all our stuff. You have made us like sheep for slaughter and have scattered us among the nations. You have sold your people for a trifle, demanding no high price from them. In other words, you delivered our ancestors out of slavery. You're delivering us into slavery. It feels like that we're just moments away from destruction. Verse 13, you have made us the taunt of our neighbors, the derision and scorn of those around us. You have made us a byword amongst the nations, a laughing stock amongst the people. All day long my disgrace is before me, and shame has covered my face. At the sound of the taunter and the reviler, at the sight of the enemy and the avenger, all this has come upon us, though we have not forgotten you, and we have not been false to your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way. Again, he's saying, can allow us to reiterate the fact that we have been completely faithful to you. We have not turned away one step. We have been attending, we have been giving, we have been praying, we have been studying the Bible, we even joined the dream team. And we'd understand if we kind of just been morons, if this was all just a result of our disobedience or our lack of faith, but it seems like we're just snake bit, like you don't even care. I mean, we are first ballot team God, but you're not team me. Verse 19, he ain't done yet. Yet you have broken us in the place of jackals, and you have covered us with the shadow of death. If we'd forgotten the name of our God or spread our hands out to a foreign God, would God not discover this? Of course he would, for he knows the secrets of the heart. Yet for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Now, this is an interesting text right here because it sheds some light on a very strange quotation in my favorite chapter of the Bible, Romans chapter 8. And until I began studying for this message, I never quite put all of this together. Now, if you're not a Bible nerd, hang on for just a second. I'll get back right with the rest of you in a minute. For those fellow Bible nerds out there, let me just tell you about this chapter for a second. Paul is laying out the struggle of living in a broken and decaying world. As a matter of fact, the struggle is so real that sometimes you can't even figure out what words to say. You're hurting so bad, you're just like, ah! That's all you got. I mean, that's all you have in that moment. But what Paul does in Romans 8 is he assures the reader that during this time, God is going to bring about an ultimate victory. God is going to bring about what would be a spiritual victory. There will be days when we feel like we're losing ground, but God is using every bit of it to accomplish his divine purpose, to conform us to the image of the Son, right? And then we have this passage. It breaks into this, says, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And then he asks a series of questions. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? This is a hypothetical question here. And then almost out of nowhere, Paul quotes Psalm 44. He says, as it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep led to be slaughtered. That's always felt out of place to me. But now it makes sense. Because Paul has asked the question, who shall be against us? And then he answers it by saying, I know how you feel. You feel like the Jews in Psalm 44. The answer is everybody and everything is against us. We're snake bit. And Paul says what we know in the New Testament is that in the end, it's all going to work out. We're going to be more than conquerors through him who loved us. But it doesn't feel that way today, does it? I mean, not always. I mean, let's not bury the lead here. I mean, can you really talk to God like that? I mean, it seems pretty accusational if you ask me. They are indicting God. That's what they are doing. But I've got to say that I'm a little bit sympathetic. How many times do you have to hear about, we marched around the walls, we marched through the sea, we saw the sun stand still? Listen, we haven't seen anything like that. We've only heard about it because you haven't done anything like that for us. I get it, though. I'm kind of sympathetic. Aren't you? I mean, there's some of you in the room, you're like, yeah, I get it, man. In the last 18 months, I've been in 6 weddings. I hadn't been out on 6 dates during that same amount of time. Everybody else talking about finding their soulmate. I'm just looking for somebody with all their teeth and a credit score above 650. I mean, that's all really I'm looking for. That's it. Some of you are like, well, yeah, you know, I've seen other people. I mean, I've seen God bless people financially, man. They're getting raises and promotions. Their businesses are taking off. They're driving nice cars. They got these big old new houses that they're posting about. And I mean, man, that bro got a boat, man. He got a boat. Meanwhile, every single month, it feels like a struggle for us. Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories. Sometimes you put them up on the screen during church of people's marriages that have been restored, people that have been able to rekindle the flame. Any flames in our marriage are due to the fact that ours is a dumpster fire. That's the only reason you can see a flame out of that one. And my spouse and I, we've been trying to get pregnant for years. I hear stories of unwanted pregnancies. Every time I hear a story about somebody who doesn't care about a child or wishes they didn't have a child, it just rips my heart out. Some people get to death do us part is a long, long trip. For some of us, it's just really, really early. There are seasons where it rocks. And there are seasons where it works. And let's just get real raw for a moment. And there's seasons where it sucks. I don't know if I'm going to get a reprimand from the overseers for saying that or not, but that's how we feel. So yeah, God, I've seen you do some incredible stuff in the lives of other people. But seeing you do it in the lives of other people doesn't make it better for me. It actually kind of makes it worse. I don't want to say that out loud like the people here in Psalms are saying. I put my faith in you. I keep showing up to church. I keep believing. I keep trying my best to hold on to hope. I keep writing the tithe check. But listen, you don't seem to want to do it for me. I put my faith in you. I keep doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing my part. Won't you meet me halfway? Please. So years ago, I found myself in a situation, and I don't have the time or really the ability to tell the story without kind of impugning some other individuals. So I'll just say this. I found myself seeking wise counsel, reading my Bible, and praying, and none of it made it better. I just got more and more confused as time went on. And I remember telling my wife one night that I'm going to keep praying about this, because I know that I'm supposed to, but I've pretty much given up any hope that it'll do any good. You ever been there? I mean, how frustrating is it when you believe that God could do something, but he doesn't? And when you're in that place, even though it feels like you're not supposed to be mad at God, you actually are. That's exactly what the Israelites are doing. They're mad at God, and you got to give it to them. They don't hide it. They let him have it. And in doing so, they teach us a very valuable lesson. And if you're taking notes, you need to write this down. Don't bottle it up. Pour it out. And pour it out they do. Awake, he says in verse 23. Why are you sleeping, O Lord? Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and our oppression? For our soul is bowed down to the dust. Our belly clings to the ground. Rise up. Come to our help. Redeem us for the sake of your steadfast love. Do something. How long are you going to sit by and watch me suffering until you finally intervene in some way? Are you asleep? Is this some sort of sick and demented game of hide and go seek? Why aren't you doing anything? And the psalm ends. We don't sing songs like that around here at Sea Live. I mean, that's the end of it. No happy ending, no resolution. Maybe it came. Maybe it didn't. And you may be thinking today, you may be like, man, Pastor, this series is getting started off with a big old womp womp. I came thinking it was summer. It's going to be a little bit light and stuff. And all of a sudden, I got Debbie Downer up there talking. I get it. But that's exactly why we picked this psalm. Because we feel this pressure, I think all of us do, is maybe more at church than anywhere else, is to slap on a smile and to act like everything is just absolutely hunky-dory, right? We used to hide it behind suits and ties, and now we hide it behind dark rooms and haze machines. I mean, it's just different, right? We've convinced ourselves that what it means to be a follower of Jesus means you slap on a smile no matter where it is that you go, and you have this positive attitude. And I just want to say, listen, there are a handful of people in this room that is your personal disposition, man. You absolutely are positive everywhere you go. And on the behalf of the rest of us, let me just say, you make us sick. And I'm talking to you, my brother-in-law, Andrew Knight, right over there. I see you, huh? Yeah. You know, for the rest of us, man, there's disappointment and there's frustration and there's pain. And yes, sometimes there's even anger towards God. But we're not supposed to be angry at God, are we? I mean, the truth is if there's some sort of problem out there with God and we're not God, then the problem is really with us. So I just bottle it up, don't I? I just kind of put it inside of here and I slap on a smile and don't share my feelings with God or anyone. And I walk into CG or I walk into the service or I walk into the growth track room and I'm hiding it. So that's why we preach on Psalm 44 today. Is to show you that it is totally acceptable and I would argue spiritually healthy to express your frustration and anger with God to God. Would you start it? I promise you it will be a discipline that will serve you well. And the first time I kind of saw this, principle playing out was the very first time I went to see a counselor, and I found him practicing a tangent of this principle. His name was Dr. Booth, and I was sitting there, and it's healthy, it's therapeutic. I sat there in that room, and I bet over the course of that session that Dr. Booth said 100 words, and I probably said 5,000. It would have been more if it wasn't for the tears. Now, here's why I point this out, is I walked away from there, though, feeling lighter, feeling rejuvenated. And it wasn't because he gave me a great piece of insight. I could hardly say my name in 100 words. He didn't do anything. He just sat there and listened, and it felt like he was empathetic. That's it. And so I know it's not pretty, but we need to stop living in a world of pent-up frustration and bitterness and anger, and we need to pour it out to God. I mean, it's in the Bible. Psalm 44 is there for a reason, despite the fact that it sounds like the diary entry of a 13-year-old girl that's just ticked off that mom and dad would not let her go to the party. It's in the Bible. But why? Well, I think you have to turn to a New Testament parallel in the book of 1 Peter chapter 5 to find it. He says to cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. In other words, let me paraphrase. He says, let me know your complaints. Let me know what you're worried about. Let me know what is stressing you out. Why? Because I care for you. Yes, God knows it's all going to work out someday. He knows what his divine sovereign plan is, but I care for you in the pain right now. Now. You really think you're going to offend the God of the universe by being honest with him? You really think he's going to go, oh, he knocked me off the throne. That's not fair. I didn't feel like a Lord at all today. I mean, you think that's going to be that way for him? No. It's okay to be emotionally honest with God. Jesus did. I mean, like what we would call maybe the most important moment of his life. He's hanging on the cross, and one of the seven statements that he makes from the cross, he yells, Ilahi, Ilahi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? You know what that sounds like? Psalm 44. Why is it this way? So the scriptures invite it, but Jesus modeled it. And I think for many of us, in an attempt to avoid disrespecting God, we aren't always emotionally honest with him. We feel like if we're honest with our frustrations, that God will smite me. After all, he's got control of lightning bolts, and it's just, right? I'll be in a car wreck. I have financial disaster, so I just got to keep my mouth shut. Listen to me. Emotional honesty is the way to spiritual intimacy. Don't bottle it up. Pour it out. If you will be honest with God, it gives him the ability to speak back into it, to speak into your soul. So God put Psalm 44 in the Bible because he wanted you to know that he can handle your strong emotions. He can handle your frustration. He can handle your anger with him. Not just can he handle it, but it has been my experience that is where he does his best work because he cares for you today. In your pain, as unjustified as it may be, he still cares for you. Jesus had 3 siblings that were very close to him: Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Lazarus got sick, and Jesus shows up after Lazarus dies. And the story tells us that a woman, pretty audacious in this time, a woman in Mary and Martha runs out to Jesus when he's still outside the city gates, and she's like, "You are a friend of ours. If you would have been here, he wouldn't have died." They go and find her sister, and she comes at him just as hot. She's like, listen, we saw what you've done for everybody else. If you would have been here, he would not have died. You've been healing people that you didn't even know, but you weren't here for your best friend. That's the accusation that they put towards Jesus. You know how Jesus responds? It says, when he saw, let me just read it to you. It says, when he saw their pain and anger, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Next verse. Listen, here's an opportunity for you to memorize a passage of scripture, the shortest verse in the entire Bible, right here. But it's rich. It's rich. Jesus wept. Now, Jesus didn't weep because Lazarus was dead. He was fully aware that he was about to raise him from the dead. He knew how the story was going to end. And had I been Jesus and Mary walk up to me with that little Mary-like attitude, trying to be some kind of Nancy, jumping on, where are you? Why weren't you here? You don't care about us. I'd have been like, oh yeah, is that what I am? Is that what I think about, huh? You think I care about? Oh, well, let's just see how this thing all plays out. Come on, girl, come on, give me a little more. And then when her sister, she does the same thing, I'd have been like, hey, girl, no, man. Oh, is that right? Is that right? Is that right? Is that right? Let's just see how this plays out. We'll see who your daddy is. That's what I would have done. But not Jesus. Jesus wept because he hurt with them in their anger, in their bitterness, and in their grief. He didn't rebuke them for their disrespect. He just said, I know it's painful. Because he represented a God who steps into our mix no matter where it is. This is not some glossed over sacrosanct message of we just need to trust that God's going to work it all out in the end. Oh, that's true. But today the story is it's okay to pour it out when you're not seeing it and you're not feeling it. In 2004, my wife was pregnant with our second son, Joshua. And through a series of events, Joshua ended up being stillborn. And I knew a whole lot more about how to help other people process their emotions than I knew how to process my own at the time. My wife ended up in the hospital fighting off an infection in the very same room where we had our previous born son, Luke. And it was just one of those moments. And I thought that you had to overcome it intellectually. You just had to trust all the things that God has said is true. But that wasn't really emotionally satisfying. And if you've been in one of those moments, you know what I'm talking about. I sent in a chaplain, a female chaplain. And she came in and she was talking to my wife. And my wife started crying, and she never does that. And so I thought, as the man, it was my responsibility to protect her. And so I said, oh yeah, I'm a pastor. I have all the tools to help us process this information. And she politely invited me to leave the room. So I walk out in the hallway, just kind of looking around. You know what I had to be thinking, right? God, why am I in this mess? I mean, I gave my life to serve you. I give, I pray. I prayed for this child. My wife and I pray almost daily for this child. How did this happen? And after a few minutes, who knows how long, the chaplain walks out of the room, and I walk in, and my wife has clearly been crying and still a few tears. And I ask her, what did y'all talk about? And she said she just cried with me. And I said, did that help? Now, men are stupid. Well, at least this one is. And I don't think I recognized at that moment how cynical or smug I must have been. And my wife said something to me that I'll never forget. And it's personal, but it's not necessarily private. She said, I deserve to grieve however I need to grieve. And I just shut up. And I cried. And because I know the nature of God, and because he cares for me, Jesus wept. Heavenly Father, in this room, there are people that are just in the middle of it. And today, they just needed to hear that even though you know how this thing is going to end, you know how this whole deal is going to work out, is that you are speaking into their hurt and their pain. And I pray that somebody during this prayer time, during this final song, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, Father, I pray that they would get gut level honest with you. They would get Psalm 44 with you. They would cast all their cares upon you because you care for them, oh God. Thank you for a Savior that weeps with us. That even though the victory is assured, that today you are present alongside us. And I know it hurts to be here today and to not have a spouse sitting by you that died years ago. I know what it is to struggle with infertility, to hurt because of besetting sin, that every time you seem to take a step forward, you immediately begin to take two steps back. Father, I pray that today, that wherever it is that a person finds themselves, that they would recognize that you are right there in that pain with them. We are claiming that victory in the name of the one who not only died, but also wept, Jesus. trust you, regardless of how you seem to treat us, because it was all settled at his cross. Thank you, Jesus, for that.